Hello, everyone, and welcome to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods, all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey Hargis.
And I'm David Hargis. So whether you're live, I see you out there, Janelle. Thank you. Good afternoon to you as well. Or maybe you're watching the replay, or maybe you're just listening to this as a podcast. It's all good. We're just happy that you are joining us to learn about Montessori. And if you want to know more about our work, you can head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So today we have another installment in our awesome lessons series here on YouTube. And we are talking about a Montessori elementary topic today.
That's right.
Something that is really core, actually a foundation part of the elementary curriculum itself.
That's right. And I think this is a little unique because we did the essential materials list back before this series. It was awesome. If you want to go back and watch those episodes. And now we're doing the awesome lessons. Mm-hmm. And I think this may be the first lesson. It's certainly the first awesome lesson we're doing that's only really for the lower elementary. You don't really use this lesson.
That is correct.
With the primary kids. It's not going to hurt them. No. A child is, as talked about before, a child is kind of like a cup. It'll hold the information. It can, and then the rest will just flow out, and that's okay. The cup runneth over.
That's right.
So if you share this story with your little ones, it's not a bad thing, or this lesson. But really, when we think about the lesson, it's for the older set. But it is really, really important for those older kids.
Yes, it is for ages 6 and up. But a lot of Montessori elementary homeschoolers especially have an environment where there are little ones around. And when our oldest was 6, we had a 3-year-old. And we didn't exclude our 3-year-old from the lesson just because he wasn't really ready for it. We
it's the
included,
cup again. It's not, he got what he got out of it.
Exactly. And we got to do it again in 3 years.
You do it all the time.
And again and again. Yeah. So it's a lesson that you can just keep on going year after year after year. You can, all right. Well,
so what is this?
I'm really excited to share exactly what it is.
Yes, what is this awesome lesson?
This awesome lesson is the timeline of life.
The timeline of life.
Timeline of life. Yeah, it's actually. I know it sounds more like it's a material than a lesson, but we're going to show you how to use it as a lesson.
Totally.
You do not have to have anything that is pre-purchased. We are just simply talking about a timeline. And that is something that we use in the Montessori elementary curriculum over and over and over. Mm-hmm. Timelines are really, really a great way for our elementary students to learn and conceive of time. A lot of people ask in the primary years, when do you cover history? And the answer is, we don't have history as a core subject. History is really not... It's not really covered as its own subject in primary.
That's right. Or in lower L in our...
That doesn't mean you don't learn about historical things,
Totally.
Absolutely. But in the elementary approach, it is like history, and is a big part of the curriculum.
Wound into humankind.
Yes.
And
physical science and life
science. As this lesson is a largely, we would say, is a life science focused, but there's physics in here, there's humankind in here, there's storytelling, of course, because it is it isn't the second great story. You want to talk let's talk about that. So the timeline of life is a thing that you can make, but it's not about the material stuff. You could go buy one, but really it's something you would construct with your child, and it pairs, I think is the fair way to say it, or you correct me if I'm not saying this clearly enough. I would say it pairs with the second great story, with the coming of life.
Yes, it does.
So it's a distinct. So what are those great stories for anyone out there who's not familiar with this concept in Montessori?
Okay, so fun. So in Montessori Elementary, there are typically, we say there are 5 great lessons. There are actually more great lessons than that. But what we really mean by great lessons is we're talking about origin stories.
That's right.
And Maria Montessori loved mythology super much. She was also very religious, but she was also a scientist. She was really extremely interested in evolution and the passage of what we call like big history or deep, we call it like deep history.
Yeah.
I think
That's
both.
Right.
So if you look up, what is big history, that essentially is the premise for the whole elementary curriculum. Maria Montessori really wanted children to understand not just how to understand the concept of day-to-day time or week-to-week time or year-to-year time, but like vast concepts of time.
Yeah.
So she paired with these certain concepts, stories that she would tell about these different periods of time. So Mary was born.
The coming of the universe.
Yes, how the universe formed. And of course, our knowledge of how the universe actually formed is changing with, as we learn more and more about the universe. This is not information that is static. And so that's why it's important not to just refer to what Maria Montessori first told as her great stories, but to really fact check it and see if that is what scientists today still believe happened.
That's right.
And the second great lesson starts from the very beginning of the origin of life to now.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then the third great story, just to summarize, is about the coming of humankind. The fourth is about the development of language, written language. And the fifth is about the development of mathematics. And if you put them all together, they make sort of an uber story about the fantastical, amazing time before life, and the physical processes and all the wonderment that happened in the formation of our universe and on this thing that we live on called the Earth, and then the deep dive into the 500 or 100 million years or so of how life came to be in terms of its like biological processes on this planet, and then focusing even more deeply into now comes a very, very, very special being on this planet that we call humans. And how did humans come about and what makes us who we are? And then these two really foundational inventions, the invention of the written word, and then the invention of mathematics. And what I love about this is it's sort of broken into this. I love to see it as kind of like a fulcrum. When humans come, the sort of, even the way I think about the subject areas, it really becomes like things that existed beyond, before human ability to describe, and then things that came after humans were able to describe. And that would be things like written words and numbers and art and all those other things. Now, it doesn't mean that, the timeline of human development is very complicated and they didn't just like spontaneously happen. But there is something grand in that story. And this is just one little part of it that, like I said, is ongoing in terms of our knowledge. What we know now about the ancient past is so much more than what they would have known even in Maria's time.
Correct.
So,
yes. So let's talk about exactly what we're teaching. We're teaching children how to conceive of time from the moment that life first began to where we are now. And that is the lesson that we are teaching children. And as it turns out, humans have only been on that time, in this vastness of time. Humans have only existed for just this teeny tiny bit. And so that is actually one of the points of this huge lesson that we give children. This activity is helping children to understand just like all of these creatures, their evolution, existing on Earth and growing and changing, all leading up to the development of humanity.
That's right.
And the timeline just kind of ends where we are.
That's right.
But with the knowledge that it will continue on.
That's right.
So it's a really, really cool lesson. So just to think about this vastness, humans, according to what scientists believe today, have only been on the earth as some kind of human form for the past 4.5 to 6 million years.
That's right.
That seems like a long, 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 long time, but it starts seeming shorter and shorter when you think that dinosaurs were on the earth 240 million years ago.
And disappeared 64 million years ago.
Right. And then when you think about how fish were, living around on this earth 500 million years ago,
Right.
Your mind just starts like, okay, wow, conceiving of just that much time is really hard for us as adults.
It is. And I find it great because and not only is it interesting, but I find it great because it's such a wonderful exercise in humility. Because I think we humans tend to want to put ourselves at the center of the universe and the center of the world, and we are not, right? And I think once we start to understand there are greater things beyond us, that we can see those in very real ways, it should be humbling. It should remind us of our place in the universe, and that as much as we know, we don't know a fraction of what there is to be known. And we may never know all that. It may not be within our capacity as humans to ever really understand those things. So I love that it kind of gives you a sense of, because I think in the modern world, we tend to be there's a lot of scientism in the modern world. And I love science and I love facts. I love history, but there's more to the world, in my opinion, than can be described using science alone. And I think when we get obsessed with factual knowledge and science alone, we start to lose the wonderment, the sense of truth in the world, the sense of the fact that we are small, that our lives are very small, that all that we've done as a human species is very, very, very tiny. And if we look at the vastness of time, like with our timeline of life here, we begin to see, wow, I can hardly even conceive of the wonder that is out there.
It also, it just starts to feel very magical and very mysterious. Maria really wanted children's imaginations to be captured. The truth is we do not know what the dinosaurs actually looked like. We don't for sure. We're starting to think that they probably had more likely to have fur and feathers than to have reptilian skin, but we don't actually know that. No one has actually seen any of these creatures
nor ever will.
Life. And so, by giving this lesson, we are inviting the child to really ignite their imagination about possibilities, not only possibilities about what these creatures, these prehistoric creatures looked like in the past, but what creatures could evolve to look like in the future, or in an alternate universe. I mean, we're really opening their world up for a lot of, a lot of like fantasy conceivement as well, to kind of open up the mind. So from here, we can go right into studies of like science fiction and fantasy and think about what is stoking the imagination of human beings and why, so it's a really wonderful lesson. It's worth waiting for. If your child is in primary and you don't already have an elementary child at home, if your child is 3, it's worth waiting until they're about 6 or 7 years old before really revealing this huge,
because it can be
lesson.
Kind of huge.
It can be really overwhelming. Yeah. So, in the primary years, we really try and like give it in little parts, so maybe we'll study dinosaurs, but we'll kind of keep that small.
Yeah.
But in the elementary years, we really want to work big with our children. So Maria Montessori believed that if children could work with a timeline, then they would be able to conceive of this vastness and their imaginations would be stoked and they would want to go further into research. And so that's really one of the big purposes of this, is to like deep dive into some research.
Yeah. So we have an example. So again, I think let's go ahead and show this to kind of give people a more concrete. If you're watching, if you're listening to the podcast, we'll describe it as we go. But
yeah, I also want to show. I can show in this book as well.
Yeah, that's great. So what we're saying is, it's a timeline, right? It puts together things sequentially, historically, sequentially, and kids love it. And like Aubrey said, it's a big concept, but it's also wonderful when it's a big work. So this is something you would sit and create. Now you can buy them. There are lots of great timelines of life out there. There's great books. I know you were about to show this Timelines of Everything book. But what's really wonderful is that you don't have to use any of those. You can just make your own and let your child's imagination open up, because that's the whole point. Big work with big ideas. So we're basically going to run from so just to show you this one real quick.
It's fine.
So basically, we're talking about the period of time after the Earth cooled. And so again, I'm unrolling a little example. We didn't make, this isn't a full timeline of life, but you can see kind of the bits here. So you had the cooling of the Earth, billions of years ago, and then the formation of the chemicals coming together, and the vulcanization, and the blue-green cyanobacteria forming, and how this is beginning to oxygenate the planet. And then you have about 500 million years ago, the Precambrian explosion. This is where you have the first sort of life as we think of it. This is the time of the trilobites and the things like that.
I see a jellyfish.
Yep, jellyfish, trilobite. And that lasted for millions, hundreds of millions of years. And so if you're looking at the little picture here, it's not to scale. This one, the way that I've conceived it, or we've conceived it, is this would be like 1 billion years, this one sheet on the side. And this would be hundreds of millions of years. But what we're doing is we're trying to tell the story. First, there was the creation through chemical processes and water vapor of the ingredients necessary for life. And then you have that very simple early life, but it's all in the water. And then you move from there to the first kinds of plants begin to form, under the water marine life. And this is finally a creature crawls out of the water onto the land. And you can kind of explore that in deeper knowledge. And the first plant life on the earth begins to form. And then eventually you have this very early, it's almost like the dinosaur 1.0 period, where you have, the Diplodocus and other sorts of creatures, ferns, flying insects.
Dimetrodon.
Oh yeah, Dimetrodon, you're right. So you have these early creatures, and then they're all wiped out. There's a great big die-off, and there's a number of die-offs that happen. There's a die-off that happened between the Cambrian age and this age, and there's a die-off that happens here, and then you would go on. And so then you would get to the age that we would think of as dinosaurs, which is another period, and it lasts for 200 million years or something like that. And it can be further broken down. And so on your timeline, not only you're doing these big slices and telling this big story, you're also then able to kind of chunk it a little bit further down. So, for example, you could say that in the age of the dinosaurs, you had the Cretaceous, the Jurassic, and the Triassic. And there were different kinds of creatures that lived on the earth. And then another extinction event, and it wiped all of those out. And now the earth is ready to start over, and mammals emerge, or the mammals as we understand them begin to grow and thrive, and on and on and on. And eventually you're going to lead up to, you get to the primates, and you get eventually to humans. But we would leave the study of humans to the third grade lesson. In this one, what you're really saying is there is a planet, it's cooling, and as it goes through this cooling, the water vapor is coming out, it's forming these oceans, it's creating the chemical stew, and within that chemical stew, eventually cyanobacteria forms, and from there, over the course of a billion years or something like that, eventually you start to have primitive life, and then over the course of 500 million years, this immense amount of time, you go from very simple, dying off, coming back, dying off, coming back, and eventually you come to us. And it just blows your mind to think about all the things that existed on this earth that we can't see anymore. That's the thing that's so humbling.
So that is a great sum up of the timeline of life and kind of what one looks like. Let's tell them about how to create their own, because I feel like This is the way with your child creating their own timeline of life. Even if you have one already at home, they are going to be using it to further their own research and to learn more and more about,
That's right.
What was actually happening during these time periods,
or what we think based on the best science we have,
based on and really following their own interests.
That's right.
So what I really recommend is that whether you have purchased one, ours or otherwise,
making
online,
your own,
make one of your own, or buy one fully formed that's shipped to you, whatever you choose to do, or whether you're using one in a book. And I'll go ahead and show that now. That this is from this book, Timelines of Everything. That when making your own, it's actually really helpful to have some timeline supports.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many different ways that artists have conceived a timeline. This one is kind of a vertical.
Yeah, it's really big.
Yeah, so it actually starts down here and weaves its way around, and it actually stops at 252 million.
Well, it's
it goes on.
It goes down there to the Ice Age.
Goes on to the Ice Age. So
to the Neolithic era.
So anyway, this is one timeline, and you could certainly use this in order to create your own timeline.
Well, what I love about this timeline, and this is, so as I mentioned before, kind of these big broad strokes, we're telling a story, like a myth almost. What I love about this, and what I love about this representation is it's very arty, right? It starts from the bottom, not from the top, which is kind of unusual. And it's starting with the oceans, which is where life emerged. And you come up and then out of the oceans onto the land, and then higher and higher as though you're onto the surface of the earth. And so there's a physical representation of that movement of time. How fun would that be to create with a child?
Yeah. So what we recommend that you do for this actual lesson is, of course, you're going to share the story of the coming of life with your child. And you can do that in any way you like. You can use props. You can use impressionistic charts. You could use a timeline to tell the story, kind of as David sort of showed you, a little modified version. But in order to do this lesson, you need a timeline. And so here's how to make one. So you're going to get a big roll of art paper. So it just doesn't even have to be that big. It could be like, this tall and just something very, very, very long. And you're going to write the eras or the periods of life on it in order. I know people who have done it just one page, per.
You could do like the one that we did here.
Yeah, one like that we did here, or even less detailed. You could do a page for the Hadean eon and the page for the Archean eon, and one for the Proterozoic eon, one for the Cambrian. You could just do a page by page by page. Doesn't really matter. You could just write them in a nice long list along a big roll of art paper. I know a lot of people get really caught up, and I did too, when I was trying to make one, about trying to make it to scale. And
it would be enormous.
It's impossible to do that. It would just be it would be so huge, and it's really not necessary. We're just trying to help the child to really conceive of some long, vast length of time and the different things that happen along the way. So just write them down, make some space in between, write them in order. And then what you're going to do with your child is research. Okay, well, what happened during this period? And the answer is as easy as Googling. You can really just type in Hadean period, your Hadean era. I guess it's era. Or is it epic or era? I think it's era. And what will pop up is just a lot of interesting information. And then you can read that information with your child, or, find a book that talks about it and read that. And then you illustrate it. And so your child can just take their crayons and just illustrate some of the things that they learned. Or you could go online, say you're researching the Jurassic period. Maybe you learn, I think Triceratops was in the Jurassic period. So maybe you learn Triceratops was in the Jurassic period. You find some little pictures of dinosaurs or draw them on paper, cut them out, and just glue them onto your timeline. And it can just grow that way. It doesn't have to be These are just little dinosaurs that happen to be in the dinosaur unit for Constellation.
Yeah, for those of you who are in Constellation, you'll see these.
You will see these later, Constellation
in
friends.
a few days.
But and your child could just draw what they think a Triceratops look like, or you could go online, just find a little image, print it out in tiny version, have your child cut it out, stick it on your timeline, glue it on your timeline. And it does not have to be perfect in any way. What David is correct. What you're really looking for is a story to emerge. And so you're just adding little pieces. Okay, so jellyfish came first and it, far, far, far before the dinosaurs, and so your child would be able to see that. And you know what? If they really like jellyfish, they could draw as many jellyfish as they want and glue it onto their timeline. And I think that is really the best way to do this activity and to just grow it organically. You could put it all on a wall. If you have a great big wall in your homeschool room, you could put the whole timeline of life on your wall and keep it up there for years if you want. You don't have to roll it up and put it away. You could just keep it out on your wall. And then as your child learns more about each different period, maybe they do a little work on the timeline every single week,
that's exactly
let's add something to the timeline this week. What should we add? What more dinosaurs, or how about some plants?
Yeah. Reading some books. I see, Janelle, you said you love to read Lava to Life.
The book Lava to Life is a great book. Yeah. Yes. There are lots of supports that you can bring in. And David and I have actually gone to many museums, and we always look for timelines of life.
And the best, I'll tell you, the best timeline of life I've ever seen. It's in Los Angeles. It's at the La Brea Tar Pits.
Yes,
they have the most beautiful painted mural of the timeline of life. I love it. If you ever find yourself in Los Angeles, and just go to the La Brea Tar Pits anyway, it's fascinating.
For real.
And then check out that timeline. And if you've started to do these kinds of lessons with your kids, even if by this age they're teenagers, they'll be able to look at that and it'll give them that sense of wonder, and they'll understand what they're seeing, which is that there is this amazing story, that our universe is an amazing story, and it is ongoing, and we can tell that story. And we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong all the time because we are humans, and to err is human.
Yes.
But we're going to do our best, and we're going to use our God-given sense of reason and logic to go and study and understand, and we're going to then try and piece it together, and that's going to be amazing. And really exciting.
So exciting. Yeah.
Now, I know we have to run pretty soon, but I think it's probably useful to talk a little bit about, we often get the question about questions in terms of religious concepts of the origin of life.
Yeah.
That's a question we get fairly regularly.
It is.
And so, and I think it comes up when you're talking about the evolution of life, or the evolution of humans in particular. And how do you usually approach that when those come up?
Wow, that is a fastball question to give me on a live, David.
Well, you have a very good answer, I thought.
Well, I usually say you need to do your own research and teach what you really believe happens.
That's right.
Is that the answer that I?
That is the answer. I think I wanted to make that note, because I think people will watch and they'll be like, how do I fit this in? Or how does this work with the things that I might understand or believe, or how I perceive the world to work? And it's as varied as possible. Maria herself was a very devout Christian, but she was also a scientist. I think it's interesting to note that the Big Bang Theory was in part developed by a Catholic priest. So there isn't necessarily a tension in all parts, but I know for some faith communities there can be. And we would say that it's important for you to find a way to tell the story that's authentic to your approach to life.
Yep.
And I think that was it. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Don't
be scared of trying to do the timeline of life if you have to kind of think through it in a certain way. The point is to tell a story about how life came to be.
Yep.
And it's really fun.
It is. It's so fun. I hope that a lot of you get inspired to go out and make your own timeline of life. I know it's a very intimidating activity for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like this is such a big project.
It's huge.
But it really just, it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just to give an impression. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be really, really big. And I can tell you from my own experience as a homeschooling parent that when you do take the time, to not just have pre-made a timeline of life for your child to look at, but have your child actually participate in the creation
of it, whatever that timeline of life is, however you're making it and whatever materials you're using.
It is so much of a better lesson.
Always to have that child involved, which is always which is, I guess, the big takeaway of all of our work, which is if you want good outcomes, you need to involve the learner. And that's true when they're little as when they're big. So always invite the child into that process and you'll get much, much better outcomes. This is a perfect example of that.
Totally. All right. Thank you, friends. Thank you so much for showing up. I see that Stephanie was here. Janelle was here.
Oh, we had a real quick question.
Oh, and Samyaka. She says, I wonder if when we talk about the timeline of life, we could introduce different origin stories as a cultural activity as well. Absolutely.
Would that be detrimental to the Big Bang timeline?
No, I love it. In lower elementary, in fact, that is also part of the curriculum, that at the same time that we are teaching things like the timeline of life, and the timeline of life is just not one lesson.
Yeah, there's not an official timeline.
It's supposed to be ongoing and ongoing. Like every year we come back and retell the story of the coming of life, and you just like keep on working with that timeline as long as they are interested in it over and over and over. And at the same time, you're definitely going to be reading origin stories.
Absolutely right. I do have to extend a little bit, but there's the famous version of the God with no hands.
Mm-hmm. But that is for the first grade lesson.
That is for the first grade lesson. But I think it's relevant that there are, even within the Montessori community, a long tradition of putting this together. I mean, at the end of the day, this timeline of life is its own origin story of a different type. And it, in my opinion, it's not at odds with other visions, because the fact is we don't know. That's the humility that we have. I just have my brain and my best attempt to try and figure it out. And that's what if you spark curiosity in your child, then that's perfect.
Yep. All right. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time with another awesome lesson.
Now, I think next
which
week,
one it's going to be?
It's going to be, it's for spooky season. We're doing spooky lessons.
Oh, that's right. Spooky lessons. It's going to be fun. All right. See you next week, friends.
Bye.